welcome everyone. Thank you for being on and thank you for your patience. I know we're a little past 1, so we'll get started as soon as he comes back on. But like I said, I want to welcome and thank you for joining our Business Builders series. I know you are all busy, so we thank you for joining us. And to make the most of your time, we encourage you to participate and ask questions throughout David's participation through the chat box, or you can raise your hand. I'll be monitoring that so we can get all your questions answered. And then just real quick before David gets started, I encourage you to follow us on social media so you're up to date on our upcoming Business Builders and other events we're happening. So that will be announced all on our social media, which will also be linked along with David's information and everything in the email that I will send out after the presentation. Doug, unfortunately, is not able to join us today. He has another commitment, so it'll just be me today. It'll just be me and David. So excellent. That brings me to my last slide. Welcome, David Booth. You can take it from here.
All right, well, thank you very much, Faith. And let me share my screen. All right, if you just confirm that you can see it.
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll dive in. And thank you, everyone. And thank you very much, Faith, for giving me an opportunity to come on this afternoon and just share what I'm seeing both in the Atlanta market and in the national market in general. Now, I'm going to speak to resale, but just my specialty is in the new construction space. So let's dive in. So today I did want to I'll introduce myself and kind of tell you about what I do. Then also just give you some general housing observations from both the national level and then at Atlanta. And then talk about the new construction space, and then also talk a little bit at the end just kind of about the Truist new construction opportunities that we have. So just first off, to introduce myself, just to let you know, I am a 30-year mortgage industry veteran. I started originating in the Jacksonville, Florida market in 1991, so I've been around for a while. My current role is that I support Truist markets in Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee in business development around the home builder space, and then also in working with our various home builders and managing our relationships with them. So I hear quite a bit in the home building space as far as what's going on in the industry, but that, of course, also does expand to the real estate market in general. As I mentioned, I did start as a mortgage loan originator. During my career, I've actually managed a national home builders mortgage operations center in Raleigh, North Carolina. I did that for about 10 years, and that gave me a good insight into the home building space. I've been working with the Builders Operating Committee with land, sales, the finance, et cetera. So just understanding kind of how they think and how they work. I've been with Truist. I've started with BB&T, so I've been with Truist for 16 years. And while I was at BB&T, I was our national builder coordinator. And just so you know, I live in Marietta with my wife, and I have 2 grown children. Now, one thing you will notice is that nowhere in here does it say economist. So just, full disclosure, I am not an economist, but as part of my role, it is very important that I stay in tune with what is happening in the real estate industry broadly, but specifically in Atlanta is one of my markets. But also, again, specifically within the new construction space. So I'm going to talk about those things today. So let's dive in. So just, again, these are my observations just from conversations I've had, as well as I attend many different events from economists, briefings and things like that, as well as I have a lot of data analytics tools that I can look at to help Truist in the builder space. So just wanted to give you an idea of what we're seeing and what's going on. Now, I know there is an ancient curse that says, may you live in interesting times. Certainly we are there, although I'm starting to think after the COVID and everything else that, I don't know, maybe interesting times may be the norm for a while, but certainly interesting times in the real estate market. So I wanted to start off just, obviously in mortgage, certainly interest rates are very important to me. So I just wanted to start off what we're seeing in that space. So you'll see here in this first bullet point that I had to actually go in and change numbers, because when I put this slide together, actually I've changed it several times. rates have been increasing. I'm sure you are all aware of that. So just as late as last week, we were at 5 3/4 average. And again, this isn't true. I'm not giving truest number, by the way. This is an industry average, just so you know that. So the industry averaged about 5 3/4 on a 30-year agency loan last week. As of Monday, they jumped up to 6 and roughly 6 1/4. So that happened very rapidly. Now, I will say, in just looking today, things seem to have settled down a little bit. I'm not saying rates have dropped, but we're not still going up at a rapid pace today. We may actually see a little improvement. So, but as I'm sure you're aware, that actually represents an increase of basically 3% since January. So that was not anticipated and shocked everyone. Basically, it's our worst start of the year for interest rates since 1979. So folks remember what rates were back then, but also these are the highest interest rates we've seen since 2008, and that was when I was basing this on 5 3/4. I'm not sure that may even have to go back further now to look at 6 1/4. I will say that right now the agency rates are typically higher than a lender's portfolio rate. So as Truist, we have portfolio lending that we do. And right now, actually, our portfolio rate, so even on our jumbo product and things like that, is actually better than if you were to get just a conforming loan or a government loan right now. That's just based on where the market is and what's going on. Also, ARMs are not yet ARMs are not yet a substantial factor yet. There's not a big difference. With most lenders, there's not a big difference between ARM rates and fixed rates. I do think that'll change. Obviously, ARMs have not been utilized at all hardly in the last several years. When you've got fixed rates as low as they are, no one really wanted to go for an ARM. They just take the fixed. So, but I do think now with the increase in rates, lenders will start dusting out the ARMs. There'll start being more of a market for that, and I think you'll start seeing some divergence, more so between what an ARM rate is versus a fixed rate. So stay tuned for that. We haven't seen that yet overall, but I do think that will happen. There is anticipation that the Fed will continue to increase rates in 2022 and will exercise in quantitative tightening, meaning they won't be buying as much mortgage securities, which certainly will impact interest rates. But as you can see, so the Fed hasn't raised rates 3% so far this year. So the market didn't wait on that. The market went ahead and wanted to get ahead of that. And, and so that's why we've seen just the crazy rise in rates this year. So we'll see what happens. I know the Fed is supposed to announce results today. I don't know if that may actually happen during our call, but the Fed is going to announce results sometime this afternoon. There is I believe, a 95% confidence that they'll actually raise rates 0.75% today versus, I know even maybe a week or so ago, folks were anticipating only a 50 basis points raise. So stay tuned for that. But again, that's a situation where the market's already built that in now. So they're already anticipating that. So we'll see what happens. It may even be if the Fed lowers it or raises it less than that, it may improve rates. We'll see. But again, we'll see what happens going forward with the Fed. Obviously, they're trying to tame inflation. So we have experienced a decade's low in mortgage applications. So I will tell you, lenders overall are off about 40% from last year. Now, I will say that is led mostly by refinances. Obviously, if you're at 3%, you're not interested in a 6 3/4 rate unless you need cash out or you have a life change situation. But so refinances is basically dropped off a cliff, and that was expected. So, I mean, we've been planning on that since last year. We knew that was going to happen. One thing that has been somewhat unexpected is actually that purchases have been off a little bit as well. And obviously, with rates increasing, that makes it somewhat, more expected lately. But in general, at the beginning of the year, we were anticipating a fairly strong purchase market as far as mortgages go. And not that it's been bad, it just we've had a little bit of a drop off in that was not really expected, but certainly that's due in large part, I believe, due to the interest rates, but due to many other factors, which I'll actually talk to in just a moment. Again, interest rates, as I mentioned, obviously, I'm sure you guys know that the Fed is trying to slow inflation. Core inflation was at 8.5%. Actually, that's an older stat. I think it may actually be a little higher than that now. But so we've had continued supply chain issues. Still have a very tight labor market, which is good news on the one front, but bad for interest rates. certainly the things going on in Ukraine are exacerbating what we're seeing. We've had the impacts to COVID from an employment standpoint, from a supply chain standpoint, et cetera. And we'll still have impacts from that for a while. But just in general, also the federal spending, et cetera. So we just had a lot of things hitting from an inflation standpoint that the Fed is trying to get a control of. Now, I will say that in some of the conversations I've listened to and some of the resources I've seen, they are questioning, will the Fed continue to tighten as much as expected? Now, obviously, we're anticipating a little higher increase this time than we were originally expecting. But what these economists are saying, that if we do see a significant slowdown in real estate activity, if the stock market continues to drop precipitously, or if we go into recession or look like we're about to go into recession, will those things together be enough to slow down the inflation? And if so, will then the Fed start to moderate somewhat and have more of a dovish position towards rising interest rates? And the answer is we don't know, but it will be interesting to see how, what the impacts are and where we go. All right, I did mention from a mortgage standpoint, it's really a total turn from the past. So really in the past several years, not surprisingly, about 70% of mortgage volume came from refinances. So obviously you had everyone wanting to take advantage of those low rates, which is actually going to give an impact down the road, and I'll talk to that later. But now we've actually seen more than a 180 return from that. So, so we were 70% purchase volume last year. Now, refinance volume last year in the mortgage space. Now we're at about 82% purchase mortgages, according to Housing Wire. This actually was from Monday. As I mentioned, we are seeing decades low mortgage application volume led by refinance, but also somewhat by purchases. And if you'll see that rate lock volume last week was about 5% less than the prior week. So again, still seeing a bit of a decline in that. Although interestingly, actually, I saw articles this morning that actually interest rates are mortgage applications are actually increasing this week. And I will just tell you anecdotally, as part of my role, my name is actually out there on the internet with my phone number and my email address. So I get inquiries from folks looking to usually build a home in Georgia, Tennessee, or South Carolina. And in general, throughout the year, I normally get maybe one or two a day. And so, that's about the norm. And most folks go directly to loan officers, but there's some folks who just search Truist and search building a home, and then they'll find my name, and they're in Georgia, so they'll reach out to me. So again, I normally get about one or two a day. I will just tell you, and it's anecdotal, so I don't know that it's going to continue, but just anecdotally, I've actually received 6 inquiries already this week. I've already received 2 this morning, and I think I have another one waiting for me on my phone. So again, it's one person, it's anecdotal, although I have reached out to my counterparts and they've experienced similar. So at least this week, I don't know if folks are trying to get ahead of rates or what's going on, but actually we have seen a little more interest this week, at least anecdotally. So we'll see. Although as I mentioned, there was an article this morning saying that nationally mortgage applications are actually up this week, despite the fact that we're at 6.25 on average for a 30-year rate. All right, so that's enough on mortgages. I'm sure you all have heard the interest rates, but just wanted to give you some perspective from an insider. So let's talk about national housing. So, and from a demand standpoint, so demand is still strong, but it is starting to cool. Obviously, interest rates are having an impact on that. And really, the biggest challenges so far are around affordability, which certainly interest rates have an impact on that, but not just interest rates. We've seen, I'm sure all of you in the industry have seen just the phenomenal increases we've seen in housing prices. So that is squeezing folks out. So there is and as rates increase, as prices increase, there's more and more folks that are really out of reach to buy housing, especially new construction housing. Wages are increasing, but not keeping up with inflation. As I mentioned, both the affordability issue is due to price and due to rates. And a big part of that is around inventory shortages. So I mentioned earlier, all those folks that made us happy in the mortgage industry that refinanced, Again, at record levels, things we have never seen before. So, but the flip side of that is that means right now 90% of mortgages for current homeowners have an interest rate of less than 5%. So not only does that kill the refinance market for the most part, but if you're in your 30-year fixed 3% mortgage now, that's going to lock you into that home even tighter. So we've had folks not wanting to move. Well, now from an interest rate standpoint, are they going to want to give up to that 3% to then go to a 6 3/4 30-year? So those folks that might just have thought of moving because they were just wanted a new house, maybe they stay put now. Also, homeowners have acquired, obviously, the rising sales prices. Folks have a lot of equity in their homes, but nowhere to go. So not only do they not want to give up on their 3% interest rate, but also even if they sold their home, where would they go? Now, I will say that from an inventory standpoint, it does look like there may be some improvement there. I did see, particularly in the Atlanta market, that there was about new listings increased by about 6%, which doesn't sound much, but every little bit helps. And if we do have some of the demand cooling a bit, then that may help from an inventory standpoint, because we're essentially at zero now. So again, but as I mentioned, and you'll hear a recurring theme from me around affordability, because that is just a big challenge. And I know from the new construction, the home building industry, that is something that literally every meeting I'm in is talked about. So from an inventory shortages standpoint, you can also look at, well, we can build more inventory, and I'm going to touch on that from a new construction standpoint. But there are headwinds there as well. All right, so there are some positives, though, in the national housing standpoint. So we do have low unemployment. As of recently, there were 2 jobs for every unemployed person. I know we are starting to see some more layoffs out there, but still, we are very strong from an unemployment standpoint. So those folks need houses. They don't have houses. Also, the millennials are buying an increasing number. So I know for a long time in the industry, where are the millennials? Are they going to buy homes? Do they not want to buy homes? Do they want to have the flexibility of renting? Well, in listening to many of the sources, they are buying homes and starting increasing numbers. They are buying homes. They have the wealth saved up. They're able to do that. As well as one of the things that was surprising to me was that actually millennials are actually becoming an increasing part of the move-up buyers. So not only are they in their first home, but now moving up to their next home. So that is the largest group out there right now. So if they are buying more, certainly that helps us keep the housing industry going. Move-up buyers are less impacted by the interest rate increases. A lot of the buyers that contact me are looking to do a construction perm, so they've got land that they already own. So they're looking at building a home on that and getting a construction loan from us. And those folks typically have more assets, and so they really want that home that maybe really going to retire. So they're wanting to build it now before rates get worse or costs get worse. So we're finding that they are less impacted by the rate increase. Cash buyers are not impacted by interest rates at all because they're paying cash. So those folks are not impacted. So that is positive. And again, folks have accumulated wealth during COVID and in their homes. So there is an opportunity there, especially if they have land, to sell that, cash out, and then build their new home if they want to do that. However, some buyers don't want to risk further price increases, so they're getting out there now. And honestly, if that's part of what's driving the added phone calls I received this week is around more interest rate increase, but also they don't want to miss out and have that price keep going up and up and up. Now, on the flip side of that, there are some that are holding back buying because they don't want to buy at the top. So there is some counterweight to that as well. But one thing I do want to remind folks of is that when we're looking at year-over-year comparisons, we're looking at comparisons against a record year, a monster record year. So just keep that in mind. So it's not like we're going back, 100 years since the worst house sales ever. No, we're off from last year, which was a record year, and honestly, home builders there wasn't enough inventory to keep up with demand. So do keep that in mind when we look at year-over-year comparisons, that we're not comparing against a bad year, we're comparing against a record year. So do keep that in mind. So one of the things that is amusing to me is I'm on all these calls, and it honestly, So everybody asked, so all right, so where do we go from here? And this goes back to, I'm not an economist, but I'm relaying what I'm seeing and hearing. So where do we go from here? It honestly depends on who you ask. So I've got a couple of headlines here. This actual one, the first one here is from Zillow, or actually it's from Housing. It's from April, so it's stale. I admit it, it's about almost a couple of months old, but still relevant. So, so what home prices will look like in 2023, according to Zillow. And you'll see that they revised that home prices would rise only 15% from March of 2020 to March of 2023. So that's down basically 3% from the prior month average. But so their forecast is, well, it's dropping, so prices are only going to go up 15%. If you're in a housing crash, you don't see prices go up 15%. So it is just even a negative headline if you really look at it. Okay, so prices will only go up 15% next year. That's way more than they normally would. So now you see the next headline here is actually from Forbes. So the housing market boom is over as new home sales implode. Here's what to expect. So, that's actually, by the way, this article was from last year. So I just want to point that out to you. So it depends. You can see the doom and gloom, or I will show you. I do want to move on and talk about Atlanta, which is from a more positive standpoint. So now I will caveat this: if interest rates do continue to increase and we get to 8 or 9%, I don't anticipate that to happen. Again, I'm not an economist, but just what I'm hearing and reading, I don't anticipate that to happen. I think we'll probably settle down. Actually, in my opinion, again, not an economist, just based on what I've seen, probably settle down close to where we are now, if not actually go back a little bit. And part of that will help once you settle in and rates aren't rising like they are now. That does help settle down the market. You honestly kind of get used to it. Many of us, when I got into the industry, rates were over 10%, so we can remember that. So moving to Atlanta, I do want to start there. So this actually is a comment from a seminar that I attended last week from Market Insight here in Atlanta, an awesome organization, and they put on a monthly Market Insight meeting where they go through. It's called Market Watch Atlanta, where they go through and go through 100 slides, very detailed information. They do a great job. But just one of the things I want to highlight from that is keeping with its trend to be ahead of the curve and set accurate benchmarks, or what that are used nationally. Market Insight released May numbers for Atlanta in the Southeast. I'm focusing on Atlanta. So total pending sales went negative year over year in April. Now again, this is from April, but improved in May. And Atlanta was only down 2%. And this is sales in general, not just new construction. So we're down 2%. So that doesn't seem like an implosion. And that was after the initial rate run up we had. And at that time, we were already, had rates quite higher than what they have been. So 2% down in April, but back in May, overall it was down 2%. So we saw improvement in May. But what John pointed out, which is really interesting, is home closings at over 300,000 were actually up 25% year over year from a record year of last year. So if you pull out the home closings below $300,000, we're actually up year over year in Atlanta from a home sales standpoint, even with everything that's happened with rates. And the reason for that is, and according to John, the reason for that is that there is no inventory at less than 300,000. So there's just nothing to sell, essentially. And if there were, we would actually, there's a huge demand for that price point, affordability, a huge demand for that. So we would actually be up overall year over year, maybe even substantially, if we had the inventory in the $300,000 and below space. So just to give you some perspective there. Now, again, no one knows what's going to happen if rates go up to 10%. I don't anticipate that, but if they do, or if we go into a deep recession, who knows what will happen. But at least based on where we are now and what is happening now, we really are not in a bad spot in Atlanta, are actually in a pretty good spot. So I just wanted to share that with you. So when you ask, where are we going, it honestly depends on who you ask. And the real answer is we don't know. We're in interesting times. But just some positives. So from the Atlanta housing standpoint, overall housing, again, this is not new construction. The economy, we're strong. COVID job losses that we had in 2020, those have been recovered essentially. Those that have jobs want them. We have a 3.1% unemployment rate right now. And household growth in Atlanta is we've gained about 41,000 folks. So we've got folks coming to Atlanta. So that's my next point is the good news for us in Atlanta is that we're a very popular destination. Both Zonda, who's one of the resource teams that I listen to, as well as Market Watch, show folks are coming to Atlanta and coming to Georgia. We have a great quality of life here. Now, it's 100 degrees this week, but normally it's a great quality of life. But we have a very business-friendly state with low taxes, low regulations, et cetera. So we see a lot of large employers, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, coming to Georgia and coming to Atlanta in particular because of what we have to offer here. So that's great news for us. So those folks coming in are still going to need homes. They're going to need to live somewhere. Oh, and by the way, the rental industry, rents are going up as well. So you can't escape the interest rates by going to rent somewhere because rents are going up as well. So again, we are actually, again, based on where we are now, in good shape in the Atlanta market. And even though we'll see some demand cooling, since we're at almost zero inventory, that's okay. We can withstand that. Actually, it might, in some ways, not even be a bad thing. We can get back to some normal equilibrium from an inventory standpoint. Now, one other interesting thing that I did note is that according to Redfin users, folks that live in Atlanta plan to stay. So based on, again, this is based on Redfin, and actually I pulled this from the Market Watch presentation. Redfin says that roughly 86% of the folks that are here are looking to stay. So bad news, I guess, maybe for inventory because they're not leaving, but good news for our city in that folks are staying here. And by the way, there is one thing I realized I forgot to mention earlier, so my apologies. But one of the things I am hearing more of, not that Truist is planning this, so don't mishear me, but I'm hearing the question asked, so are we going to maybe go to have 40-year mortgages? And for years, no, we're not going to get to. But I will just say, with conversations that I hear externally, we may actually you may start hearing about 40-year mortgages if rates to continue to go up and affordability is still an issue. So again, not saying that I'm not giving in any proprietary information that Truist is planning that or anything. This is just more of an industry. Those conversations are happening where we may actually end up seeing space in the 40-year mortgage. So stay tuned on that. So again, from Atlanta, housing sales are cooling. Demand has slowed somewhat due to rates. However, demand still outpaces supply. So really what's holding us back at the moment is not so much rates, is that there still really is little to no supply. But again, we're still in good shape here in Atlanta. So I will say we are still considered affordable, but that is falling. So just be aware of that. So we are still considered an affordable market, but we're quickly growing out of that as prices continue to increase. As I mentioned, we do have very low resale inventory. That does appear, at least on anecdotally 1 month information, at least last month that improved. There were 6% more listings. So maybe that will help, although there are some headwinds to that. The things I mentioned earlier, from people not wanting to get out of their 3% mortgage to people not having anywhere to go, even though they've got a ton of equity in their home. One thing, and I'm going to address this more in a minute, but home builders are not able to replace communities as fast as they sell them. So in the new construction business, it has been crazy in that space, sales for subdivision, et cetera. So the velocity in various subdivisions is so fast, they're selling out quickly, and they're not able to replace those communities as fast as they've sold them. So that's going to create some more inventory strain for us. Now, I will also say that the secondary and the tertiary suburbs are becoming more popular. Obviously, one of the things about COVID is we went to work from home, or a lot of folks did. And now still a lot of folks are working totally from home and may never change. But even those that are, we are seeing more and more of a hybrid model to where folks maybe work in the office 1 or 2 days a week versus 5. So with that, they're willing to go out and move to the secondary and tertiary suburbs, because if they're not having to drive Atlanta traffic 5 days a week, if it's none or maybe just 1 or 2, they're willing to move further out for that quality of life and from an affordability standpoint to drive to qualify. So we are seeing opportunity. I know, especially in some of the southern Atlanta markets, there's a lot of new construction going on out there and a lot of activity due to it is more affordable at the moment, and folks are willing to make those changes due to the hybrid work schedule. All right, so as I mentioned, I did want to focus a little specifically on the new construction industry. So this is from a national standpoint. So this comes from the Census Bureau. This is a survey. This is not actual numbers, but a survey nonetheless. So this actually was from April. We'll actually, ironically, get a new release tomorrow. So if you want to go check that out, feel free to do that. So, but based on April, so we had this is national. We had basically 1.8 million building permits. We had 1.7 and 1. By the way, this is an annual rate. This is not April month. This is as of April, the seasonally adjusted annual rate. I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. So this is per year. So we had 1.8 million permits, 1.7 million starts, and call it 1.3 million in completions. Now, one interesting thing there that you'll note is the lag between housing starts and completions, and they're not normally that far apart. But as I mentioned, the supply chain issues, especially from the builder standpoint, actually, I'll dive into that more in a minute. That is creating an increased cycle time or build time. So we're seeing houses delayed in closing, which is creating a bit of more of a distance there than there normally would be. And you can actually see that kind of graphically on the map over here to the right. So it'll be interesting to see. Again, we get a new report from them tomorrow that will show May's numbers, so it'll be interesting to see. All right. So nationally, again, and these all apply to Atlanta as well, there are challenges to the home building industry. So I mentioned land and lot availability. We're chewing through our lots faster than we can replace them. We've actually chewed through most of the lots that were left over from the downturn before. So those lots have been eaten up with some exceptions. So builders are challenged also by local and state regulations, which has to do with zoning and other requirements by local and state municipalities and states. And I'll talk more to zoning in a minute. That is contributing to our affordability. And also from a national standpoint, environmental regulations, labor regulations, et cetera, are challenges to the home building industry. Supply chain. So let's talk about that. So I'm sure you've experienced that in your personal lives, but from a builder standpoint, that is obviously a main topic at every builder meeting I'm at. And it's been really interesting to see it's not just one thing. It's almost been like whack-a-mole, or depending on what meeting you're at, they're having a hard time getting this. So it was builders couldn't get appliances. Then we had an issue. We had the bad weather in Texas a couple winters ago. So that apparently made it to where there is a resin that is made in Texas that is used in vinyl windows that they couldn't make because they were frozen over in Texas. So builders couldn't get windows for a while. I mentioned appliances. Obviously, you've seen the lumber issues from a availability and from a cost standpoint. And paint has been an issue. I'll tell you, one of the most recent issues I've heard is builders can't get garage doors. So again, it's just been a constant battle for our home builders. So have sympathy for them of having to deal with the various supply chain issues that hasn't, it's something different every month. So they're out there trying to do their best to work through that. Also, speed of local governments have been a challenge. Obviously, local governments have been impacted by COVID, by folks being out sick, or they can't hire enough people. So getting permits takes longer than it used to because there's not the people to do that. I know some municipalities are trying to make it more automated, et cetera, but that's a challenge to our builders. Labor is a big challenge. I'm going to speak more to that here in just a second. And then affordability, which I know I've talked about a lot because that is a big issue for the overall industry. And I'll come back and talk to that more in a minute too. But I do want to talk about the residential job openings. So you'll note here, this actually came from the National Association of Home Builders. I believe this is from an email a couple of weeks ago that they sent out saying that right now, as of April, there were a record number 450,000, and this is nationally, unfilled positions in the new construction job space. So that's your trades, your electricians, plumbers, carpenters, et cetera. And that's the worst it's been since they started tracking this. That was back in 2020. So again, there's a huge shortage in labor. But one thing I did want to make sure that y'all were aware of is that the HBA, the national HBA, as well as many local ones, including ours, are working hard to address the labor shortage. So there is a group called the Home Builders Institute. Actually, they are part of the NAHB, and they are working very hard to try to tackle tackle that part of the affordability space, and that is not having enough workers. And these are good paying jobs. They're trying to encourage, especially at the high school age, to encourage folks to consider getting into the trade space, become electricians, plumbers, carpenters, et cetera. Those folks can make good money doing that. So they are actually going out into the communities, going out into the high schools, meeting with kids, trying to get money available for high schools to have training curriculum for folks that want to go into the trades versus the college track. So they are very engaged in doing a lot of work in this space. I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. I'll give you an example. They actually had an event down in Florida where they had 5,000 students that came and competed in the construction space. They have created a national partnership with the Boys and Girls Club. And I'll let you know that Atlanta is one of the pilot markets for that. So they're working with our local Greater Atlanta HBA, partnering with them. So again, to get the story out into the schools, to get kids thinking about getting into the trades as a great opportunity for them. And I'm proud to say Truist actually gave a $150,000 scholarship to HBI last year that was actually used to help them go into the high schools and offer programs. And actually, two of those high schools actually ended up being in Georgia, one here in the Atlanta market and then one in South Georgia. So just proud of that. But I wanted to make sure you're aware that the HBAs are aware of the issue, and they are doing all they can to tackle that and to get more folks to consider getting into the trade space. And that will help from an affordability standpoint. And that brings me to just my next point is, there, as I mentioned, especially here in Atlanta, but all over the country, there is basically limited or essentially no entry level property available. So there are a larger number, and as rates go up, it'll increase the number of folks who are squeezed out and cannot get into the housing space, especially into the new construction space. And with the limited inventory that we have, obviously building more is one way to get out of that. So you see where that literally every meeting I go to, that is one of the primary topics of conversation. Ways to hit that are, of course, having more labor, supply chain easing up. But one of the ways, too, has to do with zoning and allowing for more multifamily. But before I talk about that, I do want to mention that this is a picture here actually from me. I think it was last week. But just to point out, this gentleman here, which is the second from the top sitting at the table, is Mr. Jerry Conter. He is actually the chairman of the NAHB. He is actually a Savannah, Georgia built. So just as an aside, wanted to point that out. If you didn't know that, we have Georgia well represented in the senior officers at the NAHB. So just wanted to mention that as an aside. But as I mentioned, so we do have, increasing, we already had an issue with affordability. Increasing rates just is going to exacerbate that. So I've seen numbers where if you look at the increase due to interest rates, you're looking at basically a 40% increase in P&I payments just due to the interest rate. So that has already squeezed out and taken purchase power away from even more people than we had at the beginning of the year. So, but as I mentioned, so ways out of that are going to be more folks getting into the building industry, having more supply of labor, just supply chain resolutions, and builders are they're creative. They are a creative, optimistic lot, which is why I love working with them. So, I mean, they're looking at solution ways to get around things. How can you use different materials and things and make it work? So those will help. But the final thing is changes around zoning, allowing for more attached product. Many municipalities don't want it. They want the single family residential on a 3rd-acre lot. Well, that's great, and those are wonderful, but it's hard to build a single family affordably in a major metro area unless you get way out. So really our answer is going to be townhome and condos. So just know the builders are pushing and working with their local municipalities to not be afraid of the townhomes and say, hey, this is a great product. It really is what is needed to help meet your workforce housing needs. So just beware and be engaged in the fight on that really that's going to be one of the things that helps us to get out of where we are. So just lastly, and just very briefly, I've got a couple other things I do want to mention. So this came from MarketWatch. So what are Southern home builders saying? Excuse me, this came from Zonda. So this is from the South. This isn't specific to Atlanta, but again, this is from April, so we'll see how things go in May and June. But the vast majority of home builders were still saying that demand was stronger, or at least as expected. there's a small group, it was less than a quarter of them said that, well, it's a little slower than expected, but not really worrying some. But there was a very small group, less than 10%, that actually were concerned because their traffic and things have been much lower. Now, I will say that what we're seeing, a lot of the inventory and the slowdown in the sales has to do with builders are limiting sales. So I just tell you personally, the builders that we work with, some of them, they'll only release maybe 2 lots per month because they're trying to hold on and get caught up, frankly, and deal with all the other issues they're dealing with. So that is also what's contributing to lack of sales, is builders are limiting sales. So that you're not going to see those numbers. I will say that some builders are starting to offer some more incentives to home buyers to buy. We are also starting to see some builders that are having some cancellations due to interest rate or just people worried about the economy, et cetera. However, those contracts, at least most of them, they had backup buyers and maybe even backup buyers to the backup buyers to replace them with. So again, starting to see some cancellations, but not a large concern to the builders because at the moment they've got backup and still good demand. So just to give you, back to Atlanta, just to give you an idea of new construction standpoint. So in the last 12 months, there were 26,000 starts. We had roughly 26,000 closings, which is not good. We're closing about as much as we start, which doesn't help us from an inventory standpoint. So in the last, now I will say the last 12-month sales have dropped to about 33% from the prior year, to about 20,000, still not an unhealthy number. But again, as I mentioned earlier, if you're going to compare those numbers, you're comparing to just a crazy record year. And again, a lot of that drop in sales has been because of inventory due to either the lots aren't there or builders are limiting what they're selling versus a demand standpoint, and also price points versus a demand standpoint. And I will say that right now, new construction share is about 12% of closings, which is about normal for Atlanta. So again, from Atlanta standpoint, so overall sales are down from the peak. As I mentioned, this is reduced is primarily due to limited supply, not demand, not replacing projects as quickly as they sell out. Most sales are still in core counties, but there are growth opportunities in South Atlanta counties and even maybe some of the northern exurbs as folks are willing to drive farther due to the factors I mentioned earlier. So builders are still increasing prices, by the way. We'll see if that slows down. This is from April data, and that's to help them offset increases. So they're trying to protect their margins due to it's costing them more to build a home. Now I just put over here on the right, I just put over here on the right the framing lumber price. You can see those went from crazy to less crazy, back to kind of crazy to actually they're coming down a little bit, which is good news. I've already mentioned very limited entry-level housing. If we have more, it would sell quickly. Drive to qualify is still something folks are willing to do, however, and certainly, as I mentioned, willing to move further out for price and lifestyle, especially due to the hybrid lifestyle now that we have. They don't have to go drive the perimeter or north on 85 or 75 5 days a week. All right, and I did just want to close briefly with just a comment about the Truist Mortgage Builder Division, of which I am part. So there are 4, I am one of 4 divisional builder managers. Between us, we have over 100 years combined experience in mortgage, and most of us have primarily dealt working with home builders or in the realtor space. We do partner with our commercial real estate lenders in our footprint. So while we only do mortgages, we do, as Truist, have a commercial lending department, as well as here in Atlanta specifically, we have one gentleman that specifically focuses on single-family residential from the commercial standpoint. So we can help be a connection with him if we have builders looking for A&D or looking for spec lending. We also do have a processing center. We call it our Builder Center Specialization, that is actually located in Atlanta, that only processes, underwrites, and closes builder loans. So they are experts at that. They've been around for 6 years. They coordinate with many of our larger builder clients. We know what their milestones are and what they're looking for. So our Builder Center knows and has mastered closing loans in the builder space. It's because it's different than resale. And that in the builder space, you hurry up, get approval, got to wait for the house to be built, which actually takes even longer lately. And then you want to make sure that you refresh that file early enough so that when the home is completed, we're not delaying in closing. And our Builder Center is very good at doing that. They know how to get it all ready to go so that when the home's done, we're done and ready to close. We do have extended rate locks. I won't go into too much detail, but we do have those for up to a year. Actually, we have some that will go beyond that. So that obviously extended rate locks are much more part of the conversation now due to the increased interest rates. It's a way for clients to lock down and know what the rate's going to be. And by the way, some of those options do have a float down in case rates do go down between when they close. We do have doctor dentist loan program that's up to $1 million. You can do a 100% loan to value. And we do, as I mentioned earlier, do a construction perm. And lastly, I just wanted to mention, because obviously affordability is important to us, so we do have a lot of programs available in that space to help make homes more affordable through lending. And I'm only going to share a few examples here. We have our Builder Affordable Housing Program, which is a lender credit towards closing costs of up to 150 basis points of the loan amount. And that is eligible for any home builder community that is located within an LMI census tract. Now, we have to get the community added to our program, but as long as it is in an LMI, low to moderate income census tract, we can get that added. We also have a community homeowner investment program that's called the CHIP program that we actually will offer in the Atlanta market, 100% loan to value. It has no PMI. And on that program, there are income limits unless the property is located in an LMI census tract, in which case there are no income limits. And then finally, I'll mention, we do have other options, but I just wanted to go over three very quickly. We do have our Truist Grant, which offers a 3% grant up to $7,000 that can be used towards down payment or closing costs, however the borrower wants to use it. It is forgiven, but it does have an income limit associated with it, so the household can only make up to 80% of median income. So I just wanted to close with that, just to make sure I mentioned affordability, what we're trying to do to help in that space. So with that, that is it from me, and I did want to just stop and leave a little time if there's any questions that anyone has.
Thank you, David. We do have one in the chat. Sandra said, is the trust grant only for new construction?
No, and thank you. Actually, I should have spelled that out. No, that is a great question. Thank you. No, the Truist Grant program is available for any resale or new construction. So, in the same with the CHIP program that I mentioned before, those two products are available for resales or new construction. So, thank you for that. Thank you for asking that question, because that is a great question.
Awesome, thank you. And then Gary's raising his hand. You can go ahead and unmute yourself, Gary, and ask your question.
Thank you very much. David, thank you. First of all, thank you for your time and all this information.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. On the potential 10-year loans, correct me if I'm wrong, or I'd love to hear your input. The whole point of the interest rate is to slow down the economy or to make changes. I'll leave it at that. I'm no economist either. But with a 10-year note, won't that be basically counterproductive to that? Because people will say, well, now I can't afford it, and they'll keep going, and they'll maybe bury themselves in more debt. I love more sales at a higher price, trust me, but I see that as a bit of a negative. Your thoughts?
Well, I think the Fed's calculation there is that by increasing that rate, it will slow down the number of folks attempting to buy a home, or no one's going to refinance. But I think they think by raising that, it will slow it down. So that's what will help with the inflation standpoint.
But again, with that 10-year note, someone can't afford a 40-year note. Somebody says, I don't think I can do a 30-year. I'm going to wait, slowing it down. But that extra 10 years, the 40-year note, won't that put them right back out there and not make a change?
Yeah, well, and that's kind of two different. And I now understand your question. Yeah, no, the 30 years is the standard, and the 30-year mortgage really has nothing to do with what the Fed. That's just the mortgage industry standard. I don't know. Actually, that came up years before I got in. But but I don't disagree with you. So if there is a situation where, because the Fed has raised rates, if the industry goes to a 40-year mortgage, if that's available, I don't disagree with you. That could be counterproductive, because you've got a borrower that's just spreading out their debt over more time and paying more interest. But I think the Fed with raising rates, obviously it impacts mortgages, but it's not just that. It's the other cost of borrowing in general that the Fed's impacting. So I'm focused on mortgage and mortgage interest rates, but the Fed's looking more broadly as it will slow down because the cost of money is more expensive in general. So overall, even commercial lending, et cetera, folks will, there'll be a higher cost in money, so folks will buy less. So I do understand, yeah, and I don't disagree with you if that causes a switch to a 40-year, that could be counterproductive. Although I will say too that part of what's driving the crazy pricing is not just rates; it's just been the lack of inventory, the superheated demand. It's supply chain issues, labor, et cetera. So there's a lot of factors. But no, I understand, and you make a valid point. If it causes us to go to a 40-year in the mortgage, that those people that take advantage of that are actually putting themselves more at risk. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
Jerry, before I forget, ask if you could share your contact information again. And just so everyone knows, I will include it in the email that's going to go out after this. But David, if you want to put it in the chat so that they have it now, that would be great. And then also, Sandra has a question, but I'll wait until you're done entering that.
And the best way to get me is via email. So there we go. Hopefully everyone can see that.
And then I don't know if you saw Sandra's question, but she said, are you seeing borrowers going for ARMs or with the intent to refi out years later when rates probably drop?
No, and that's a great question, and not yet. Well, let me caveat that, because there's two answers. So in the conforming space, the agency space, so far there actually has not been a big divergence between the fixed rate and the ARM rate. So, for example, the other day I forget which program it was, but I saw there's only a 0.25% difference. So the 30-year fix was this, and then the ARM was only a quarter different. So folks aren't willing to go take the risk of the ARM yet, so they're staying with the fix. But I do, so that's in the conforming space. In the portfolio space, actually, I will tell you, the ARMs and the portfolios are better. So we are seeing that in our portfolio space, especially with our, and I'll just give you, this is anecdotally truest, but what we're seeing is, especially if folks getting extended rate locks on larger portfolios, so jumbo loans, we have been really competitive in that space, and so we've had a lot of folks lock into a 7-1 or a 10-1. I do think we've been so low for so long that ARMs really haven't been utilized for years now, so that's why I think the industry just didn't really have those kind of ready to pop out with good pricing on them. I think you will see that happening, and as that happens, as you get more to maybe a half-point spread or more, to where if the fix at 6 3/4 and ARMs at 5. Or say if the fix is at 6 1/4 and ARMs at 5 3/4, then I do think you will see that happen as we move out. And your answer is right, either because most people pay off their home or get out of their home within 7 years. So I think we'll see folks going to ARMs as they become more attractive, and I think that will be one of the things that does help us from an affordability standpoint too. So great question.
Great, thank you. And I did see another hand raised, but I don't see it anymore. So if you have any more questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. But if there's not any more, I just want to thank you so much, David, for your time. This has been great, super valuable information. So thank you. And again, this has been recorded, so we'll put it up on our YouTube channel and you'll receive an email with David's contact information and everything. So if that's all and there's no more questions, then I believe that concludes today's webinar, unless you have a few words, David.
No, other than just thanks again for sharing your time with me this afternoon, and thanks so much, Faith, for inviting me to do this. It was very fun.
Yes, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.